Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. At the round table, we have the founder of Doctors of Running, Dr. Matthew Klein, and I will also be here. My name is Nathan Brown, and we have a jam-packed mailbag with some heavy hitters from you all. I feel like I say heavy hitters every time, but I feel like it's always true because people are asking really unique questions about their interactions with footwear in different conditions. It's also heavy hitting because we don't get to interact and ask follow-ups. So we have to do a lot of interpretation, which is why this is never medical advice. It is just us responding to questions for the sake of education and doing some critical thinking together. But before we get into the mailbag, I do have two things for you. The first is that both of us are about, as we record this, are starting the new semester. And something that I've noticed is that each cohort has its own kind of personality. There was one group that every time a class period finished, they all clapped for everyone every time. So as an instructor,
That's
you feel
nice.
like amazing. Yeah, even if you're not lecturing, even if it's like an interactive thing, you get done, like, that's it for the day, and everyone just claps for you. And then the other one, like, they can be deadpan. Like, it's just so different, you know? And I know both of us like to carry passion and humor into our methods of teaching. And for me, like when I'm recording things that they watch for pre-class like activities, I'll write little jokes or references on the board behind me, just as little like Easter eggs that they can find. I also know that you like to tell pun jokes.
Oh, man.
Do you have any that you could share with us as a DOR community?
Yeah,
Please?
let me choose the appropriate ones. One of the classic ones I had just recently is, did you hear Newberg had this really interesting Newberg is where George Fox is, had this really interesting, very intense art competition. Did you hear about this?
No.
It ended in a draw.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, right?
Nice. All right. Well, that's enough of our joking for the night. The other question that I had for you before we
It
get
was
to the
that
mailbag,
bad. We're like, all right, moving on. That was terrible.
I thought this would be funny. No, that was good.
Awkward.
I liked
Thanks
it.
a lot.
No, I liked it. It was good. What I wanted to ask though is for both of us to just give an update of the shoes we're testing right now. What's sticking out to you? Which shoe are you enjoying the most right now?
Yeah, so there's a couple shoes on the list. I know I was supposed to bring up one, but I actually brought them with me. One of them was a little surprise. I will say the Nimbus 27 from Asics has actually been really good. I think because for me, it is starting to soften a little bit. But I know different people are going to have very different experiences with midsoles, and I totally get that. I personally feel this version is a little bit firmer and a little bit more responsive. So slightly less compliant, slightly more resilient than prior versions, which really balances the ride really well and works super well for my mechanics. It's been really comfortable. I am really enjoying it. So I would say, and because previous Nimbuses have been good, but not shoes that I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep getting as many miles on these because they're, I can get the number needed for review and move on. So that's been a really good one. The other one that kind of surprised me because I like to go against the grain. And so this shoe is a very late addition. So a lot of other reviewers have had this for a while. It's been out there. But the Adidas Adizero Evo SL was one that actually surprised me where it's breaking in really nicely. I just did a long run in it, which I didn't think I was going to be able to do with the narrow midfoot. And for $150, this is a pretty solid shoe. I'd really compare it to the Endorphin Speed 4, like very similar in many aspects, but then slightly different in others. So it's a very interesting competitor in that market. And just a really interesting shoe, especially one with this much that's coming in at $150 is really nice and great. So kudos to Adidas not only for making a fairly good product, but also, in my opinion, pricing this really, really, really well. In the age of like 160, 180, 200.
Yeah. Do you know what foam they're using in there? And is there a plate in that one?
So that's a very good question. They are using Light Strike Pro foam. And I want to clarify that even though I say that, it's every shoe it's different. Like comparing this to the Adios Pro 4, it's not the same foam. It's got the same umbrella name. Yeah. Totally different. I will say this version.
Kind of like Power and PB with.
Yeah. There's like, you can have it in the Triumph, for example. That's going to be a totally different Power and PB than say.
How did you just have the Triumph with you?
Because.
Because I just pulled that out of nowhere, and you're like, "Oh yeah, just like this."
No, because I didn't put away all the shoes from the episode that David and I just did on socketing, so that was just sitting under the table my computer sitting on. So I'm like, that's
hilarious. Okay,
so it's this fall. The Light Strike Pro in here is definitely a little bit more compliant and not as resilient as some of the other ones, which makes sense as a trainer. Now, the thing I'm confused about, you ask, is there a plate? There is apparently a nylon shank in here, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, if that's the wrong material, but it's not flexible for sure. The very end right here, for those watching, there is some flex. The rest of the shoe, it does have some stiffness, not like, oh, super, but there is something in there that it's extending a little bit beyond the midfoot. So other people were saying like, oh, it's a non-plated shoe. I'm like, that's not what it feels like.
Yeah.
So I would say yes.
Cool.
Although they may just be not calling it a plate. So
that's great.
Yeah.
My shoe right now is actually not a running shoe. It's a kind of walking commuter shoe, and it's one of these where I feel weird bringing it up because at its price point, it's a shoe that I would never ever buy personally. So you can close your ears if you don't like casual shoes for $200, which I would be in that category. But I do wear it to work every day because what I do, I drive about 5 minutes and then I park and then I take about a 10-minute walk to get to work because I don't want to pay to park on campus. So I park off campus and then I walk all the way to my office. And so it's also winter around here. Like today when I got up was -8. I think tomorrow's a high of -3 and it's going to be like -17 or something like that. So we're in that season, and it's from Hoka. It's the Transport Chukka GTX. So it's a little bit like a mid height. So it's a little bit higher, but it's Gore-Tex. So with the snow that we have, any slush or whatever, it's been pretty nice and has a little bit of grip for some of that stuff too. So I've just been wearing it every day. It's comfortable. I did half size up in it compared to my normal. So I'm normally size 9, got a 9.5, and it fits great with the half size up. Just because typically the Hoka is a little bit too narrow for me, especially when it's Gore-Tex. So the half size up helped me. What were you going to say?
I will say with a lot of the Hoka and Decker's casual stuff, for sure, go up a half size. I don't think I've experienced one that felt true to size for me personally. Yeah. I don't know if that's the extra material, what have you, but when you do that, it's comfortable.
Great. Ready to get into the mailbag?
Absolutely.
Let's dip in. Here we go. So the mailbag, our first question is from our friend Wessel, and they're asking, I have a question regarding shoes and shin splints. I was wondering what type of shoe cushioning would be best for the recovery of shin splints. Softer shoes feel like they are more cushioned, but are generally more unstable, which can also lead to increased stress on the tibia. Any advice? So Wessel's our friend from the Netherlands, and this is his question. I think we have a couple other shin splints questions. Do you mind giving a 20-second synopsis of shin splints, and then we'll go about answering Wessel's question?
Yep. So that's a very good thing to go into. So shin splints is a catch-all term. It's kind of like when people give a diagnosis of low back pain or lumbago, it really means any kind of symptoms going on in an area, referring to the lower leg, the tibia, fibula. There's people are having symptoms in that area. It's not very specific, just means that something is going on there. What it doesn't tell you, and I'll give you a couple examples of what it might be. It can very commonly be some kind of muscle. The anterior tibialis is one. Some of the peroneals are some of them. The toe and the ankle extensors can be ones that get irritated or strained. It can be the bone, which is where we get a little bit more concerned. We start talking about stress reactions or stress fractures, which are a little more concerning in the actual tissues there. You can have some sprains of some of the what's called the interosseous membrane. This isn't as common, that hold the tibia and fib together, or it can even be nerve that can cause some of these issues. So it just refers to where the symptoms are. It doesn't tell us as much about what the tissue is or what might be driving them, but there are some common things that can maybe influence some of that stuff, but it will depend on what it is.
If I could add one structure to that list, it would be tibialis posterior, being on the more inside of the shin bone. So when I was reading this question and thinking about it, I think one other hallmark regarding shin pain that I think is important, and I think where we're going to kind of steer our response to this question is assuming that it is due to irritation of the bone or of the bony casing or the periosteum. Let's kind of answer this question in that realm. And so if we go that way, I think something that was assumed for a long time is that the kind of progression of shin pain related to either the bone casing or the bone itself was due to impact forces on the ground. That if you land a certain way, there's higher impact, and that's going to, all that vibration is going to lead to breakdown of the bone over time. There's newer evidence in the last 5 or so years that's showing that the stress on the bone is actually higher due to the tension created from muscle pull, more so than the impact forces from the ground and your body. And the reason why that is important is because I think for a while it was, oh, you have shin splints or you have shin pain related to your bone, you should run on your forefoot because then you are going to decrease the amount of impact peak based on biomechanical data, which also is a whole other part of the conversation determining high and low frequency impact. But they said land on your forefoot so that you have less impact, which will decrease the stress on the bone. However, if it is muscles that are commonly like the tibialis posterior, they are more active when you're landing more on your mid and forefoot as a part of the running cycle. And therefore, they actually could become a situation where that would worsen some people's condition when they have shin splints. So that's like my little sidebar soapbox to this whole thing. But in that category, I think when I recommend shoes to folks who are dealing with regular shin pain, I'm thinking, how can we decrease the demand on the muscles that are pulling on the bone, namely tibialis posterior, maybe tibialis anterior, if that's where your pain location is. And so that typically leads me towards shoes that have some form of a stiffer rocker and not too soft, because that softer cushioning is going to increase muscular demand to create more stability. So it's not that you need a stable shoe, but I think the balance of the right amount of rocker to offload all that posterior calf musculature, as well as something that is stiff enough and firm enough so that you're not just sinking in and having to stabilize. So that's not a specific shoe, but categorically, that's what I'm thinking. Do you have any other thoughts?
I would say I 100% agree. To dive back to what what Wessel was asking in terms of like cushioning stuff, yes, 100%. So, he was correct that the softer a midsole material is, the more muscle contraction you get because you have to stabilize. And that's something we know that softer, higher stack shoes do actually increase joint stiffness. And and because the muscles are having to contract so hard to keep your foot stable or your lower extremity. The other side can be true as well, that the firmer that you go, the more the muscles have to work. Instead of necessarily tensing up so much in an isometric pattern, they're going to have to be better shock absorbers, which is also why firmer shoes are probably not the best option. And I would encourage, and people don't always like this because they like extremes, you're going to have to find the best balance of cushioning that works for you in terms of not too soft, not too firm. And that means you kind of got to put that on and figure that out. But I'd also say that to me, cushioning goes, like you said, is in part with I want a rocker, because a lot of the rockers, the whole point of them is that they reduce some of the workload on the muscles of the lower extremity. So, your anterior tib, your post tib, your calf, all that stuff won't necessarily work as hard with the rocker unless it's extreme. So finding something that's very balanced is really key. But I'd also encourage you that a shoe is good, but a shoe isn't going to fix an injury. And so making sure that you're really focusing on your rehab and not overtraining beyond what the tissue can handle is probably the most important part about this. So shoe is secondary. But if that's what you want to think about, adequate rocker, appropriate balance of cushioning, whatever that feels like for the person.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's just move right into this next question from Darren. And they're asking this. They said they've been going down a rabbit hole, looking at a bunch of videos, blogs, trying to find the right shoe. Having issues with posterior shin splints. That's kind of the pain on the back side of that shin bone, which might be more of that tib post, but it also could be bone. I think the other, can I go on a little thing on shin pain?
Yeah.
I think that there's a good differentiator for you in terms of how concerned should I be that this is bone versus this is like muscle and more of like the medial tibial stress syndrome, not necessarily like a bone fracture. If it's really on that distal couple centimeters of your tibia, so the furthest down couple centimeters, you're looking more bone. If you're looking more mid to upper part, or not upper, just kind of that mid portion, kind of the next 5 or so centimeters, you might be like, oh, this could just be medial tibial stress syndrome. That just tells you, do I need to stop now? Which if it's that distal part and you have other signs and symptoms that lead towards bone, if you think it's bone, you got to actually stop running, which I am not a stop runners from running physical therapist, but that's appropriate management of a bone related thing. All right, let's go back to this. Okay, posterior shin splints. Some days are worse than others. Currently taking a little break from running due to them flaring up again, and at the point to replace some shoes. So they've currently been running in the Brooks GTS 22, and there's some wear on the posterior back outside of the heel, which we would say is typical. That's very typical. So they've tried landing more on the midfoot, and that actually tends to make shin pain worse, which I guess is what I was just talking about in terms of landing more on the forefoot. So they've found that they naturally like to land more between the heel and the midfoot. With that said, they're guessing that they would want a shoe that has a subtle heel bevel. Also add that they run every other day, so 3 to 4 times a week, averaging about 2 to 4 miles per run, running mostly on asphalt or street and pavement type stuff, but sometimes on a dirt track. They try to keep pace around 8 to 9 minutes per mile and has an event coming up that they'll do a couple different things. So they're considering a myriad of different Brooks shoes because that's the only thing that I have experience in, but they're open to other types of companies. So what sort of recommendations may we have for this, or any specific shoes for them to try out?
Yeah. Do you mind if I take this?
Yeah, please.
All right. So the first things I'm thinking about, again, when you start thinking about that posterior side, I also want to be really respectful of not knowing their mechanics, but since they do have a history of running in a stability shoe, I'm not necessarily going to suggest them to change unless that change feels comfortable. So I want to be a little bit cautious there. And again, Nathan mentioned this at the beginning, we don't have a history. We don't have an injury history on this individual. So there's a lot of other unanswered questions. So please take this with a grain of salt. So where I'm thinking here is, so if you're shifting mechanics forwards and it makes it worse, this is a great example that Nathan said that changing foot strike isn't always the best first line thing. It takes a lot of work and it doesn't necessarily decrease stresses. It just actually moves them. And you still have the same levels. They just might be in a slightly different area. If you're having more posterior stuff, assuming it's not bone and it is muscle tissue, moving your foot strike forward is actually going to increase stress through that area because that's what those things. Now you're adding, when you land up further, you're adding more of an eccentric load through the posterior compartment, which is higher stress in that area. So yes, figuring out what's natural for you, great. I think with the Brooks Adrenaline GTS 22 and many Brooks shoes previously, and they are getting better, when you have that combination of a high heel drop plus not a very large bevel, when you land, the moment there's a large torque that's going to happen because you're hitting that tall heel, especially if it's really stiff and it's launching you forwards. So a heel bevel would be great. I don't necessarily know if I would suggest changing the heel drop significantly just because we're looking at the back. And so if you go into a lower drop, that also increases stress in that area. So comfort is again key. And I think this person needs to avoid doing something extreme. So of the shoes that were listed, the Glycerin Max might be a good option just because it is a little bit more inherently stable without being too aggressive. It's also got a far better heel bevel than a lot of the other shoes. And the bevel, again, kind of reduces the stress as you transition. It just smooths out the transition. So a lot of those muscles don't have to work nearly as hard to get through the gait cycle. Hyperion Max 2, I don't think I would suggest as much, only because the bevel is really aggressive and that shoe is very, very stiff. So that might actually increase stress through the posterior compartment. Hyperion GTS 2, if you want to try it, great. It is a lower drop shoe. So there's going to be a lot of mechanical changes that are going to happen. So I'm really concerned about making big changes unless they feel comfortable. So honestly, the Glycerin GTS or Glycerin Max, in my mind, are going to be kind of the better options because those two have a better heel bevel. They are both inherently stable. And I haven't tried the Glycerin GTS 22 yet, but it looks great. And the last version did a much better. The Brooks is doing a lot better job with bevels. And so I think if you're going to stay with Brooks, those would be the two things that I would consider. There are many other options out there, such as like if the Brooks Adrenaline is not doing it for you, the new ASICS GT 2000 series is also great because Drop is just a tiny bit lower. The transition's so much smoother, and it's a great shoe that doesn't overdo things. Might be something to try, or I would be looking at anything out there that has a better heel bevel, but still stays stable, if like stable neutral at least, so you're not just jumping really aggressively into something different. Because that's what a lot of people do is they go, I need a shoe to fix my problem, so I'm just going to go like totally change, and then it feels great for a little bit, and then you end up with something else instead of going, okay, what do I need to change? What can I make subtle changes about? So that would be, if you're going to pick those 4, Glycerin Max or Glycerin GTS 22, and just see. I would also highly suggest, if you haven't, that if this is going on long enough, you might want to consider seeing a medical professional to kind of help tease this out and see if this is actually something shoes can solve or not.
Yeah, when I was thinking outside of Brooks as a company, I was going to ask you about the GT 2000. I was also going to see, you are testing the Nimbus 27 right now. Is that in the stable neutral category, or would you say not quite here?
I would say not.
Or for this situation, I guess.
For this individual in this situation, I would say not necessarily enough, because for me, my mechanics do very well, and I've gotten a lot better over the years working in like a mild stability or stable neutral. So I can move into a shoe like this. This is just almost stable neutral. I don't know how many others maybe will do that. So I couldn't suggest that one as much as say the GT 2000.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to our next question. The next one is from Cynthia, and they're looking for a walking shoe recommendation. It's kind of, when I read this question, it's very long. I'm going to condense it, but it felt like trying to find this Goldilocks shoe for walking. So this is kind of part of their question, looking for footwear that's a generalist shoe for walking on the road and easy but hilly trails or fields, and walking fast around and a casual workplace with lots of stairs. So they got to use this shoe kind of for work, getting around, going on walks, and just having a shoe that's going to work well for them. They said that they tend to get an injured Achilles when their heel ends up compressing in the cushion in shoes. That is usually happening, she says, when there is too low of a drop, such as her Ultras that she's worn. She was using a Brooks Dyad, which is discontinued, which was not perfect because she was having issues with the fit. So it was tapering too much and was a smidge short in the toe and a little short in the arch length. But liked some of features of it, like that it had a straight fit. It was very neutral, flat on the inside, didn't have too much cushioning. So kind of trying to find something like that, because other shoes that she's tried have either too much rocker, too much foam, they're too high or too narrow, they're too rigid in the heel counter, asymmetric bevel in the heel, which wasn't beneficial for her, or too much splay in the base. So there was a lot of, because she would clip her feet together. So she's looking for kind of that Goldilocks shoe. Do you have any suggestions? I have 2 in my head, but I'll let you go first if you want. You want me to go first?
Nathan, I'm going to have you lead this one because I'm really curious.
Great. So when you started talking about, something I didn't read is she was talking about what she read about the Topo ST5 as a possible lifestyle shoe. When I thought about Topo, I thought of a shoe that wasn't fully zero drop, gave a little bit of a drop, which was something that she said she wanted, and also had just a little bit more structure to it, but not too much. I felt like it fits more the middle ground, and that was the Phantom 3. And that shoe has a little bit of cushioning. I think that it stays wide through the whole midfoot, unlike the ST5, which does come a little bit more narrow. So I think that the Phantom fits a lot of things. It's a great walking shoe. It's got a slight bevel to it. It's got a little bit of a rocker, but not really. It's flexible once you start moving it. So I think it could do a lot of the things that you're looking for and is very comfortable for walking. So that was the first one. The other shoe that I thought of was actually from Karhu. And I think that it wouldn't even matter which model of Karhu. I would say if you have a fleet feet around you that you could go try on some of these, I would go try on the Fusion and the Aconi and see which one of those, and even the Mistari Run, that is their newest model. I would say like one of their newest models. But
no, I would say I love that shoe. It is very, very, if she doesn't like a rocker, it is very, very, very well rockered. That would be my only
It's more rockered.
Yeah. It's a great shoe. Great shoe.
I think you should go try those on, lean towards those first 2, because they have They do have a rocker built into them through their fulcrum, but it's really not that extreme. And they do a really nice job with their high volume models. So they keep a really kind of non-tapered toe box. So I would go check those out, see if you could try some of the Hyvo, and then you'll feel the difference between the Aconi and the Fusion. They have a very different feel. I think that their simplest model is that Aconi. It's not as aggressive as the Fusion is now. So that's where my mind went, some to at least try out. Do you have any others?
That's actually, Karhu was the one that I was going to suggest because of what Cynthia was looking for in terms of doesn't want it too high, right? Yep. So most of their shoes are still in that moderate stack height range. The rocker is there. It's not a traditional rocker like the tall, like maximal shoe rocker. It's more like a facilitatory thing and it doesn't feel extreme. There's definitely not too much foam. I said not too high, definitely not too narrow. They do their fits super, super well. Especially the Hyvo volume is what Hyvo model is also good. And Nathan does a good job of whenever I get a Karhu sent to me, I almost always get the Hyvo model, and it is so good.
It's so good. Yeah.
It's so good. They also do not have the asymmetric bevel in the heel, which sometimes I like that posterolateral bevel, but for whatever reason, when they do this, it creates that really nice, stable, neutral ride where it's like, it's not aggressive. It's not a stability shoe, but it's also not fully neutral. It's just there. So I feel like Karhu is really, really checks off all the boxes of a shoe that I would think, it's also not too high or low drop. It feels right in the middle.
It is. Yep. They usually go 6.
Yeah. I would say that company really is where my brain went immediately, because a lot of the concern, I almost was thinking about the 880 from New Balance, the new one, until we got to the very end where Cynthia mentioned like too much foam, too high, because that version just actually went maximalist. It's like, this is great, but it's going to be different. So yeah, I'm 100% Karhu is where I started thinking as soon as you said that. I'm like, definitely agree.
Cool. All right, we're going to move on to our next question from Emily from Australia. And they're saying that they've been running for about 18 months and is 37 years old, midfoot striker, 4-hour marathoner. During that time, they've had some issues with arch pain, particularly on longer runs during marathon training, which has improved with seeing PT and strengthening her feet. So she has this kind of full thing going on. She's working on it, which is great. She did have an MRI that says she has abductor hallucis tendinopathy, which could be contributing to her pain. Interestingly, she finds the pain is triggered immediately within the first few minutes if running in the Saucony Triumph 21. So that is the pre-PB model. So that's still in Power Run Plus. Also gets pain on longer runs in the Nova Blast 4 and the Adi Zero SL2. Doesn't seem to get any pain on longer runs with the Boston 12, the Puma Deviate Nitro 2, and the Adios Pro 3. She's wondering, what is the feature of this Triumph that exacerbates the pain so much? She's wondering if it has to do with compliance of the foam, flexibility of the forefoot, or she does have a little bit of stiffness in her first MTP, though still reasonably good range of motion. So it's possible that stiffer shoes work a bit better because of this. Don't really know. So she just wants to kind of hear our thoughts. So Matt, I'll let you take it away and then I'll follow up.
Nathan, I'm going to need you to check me because I'm getting really excited and I'm probably going to make some assumptions. So please help me clean this up when I go through this. So Emily, what it is sounding like, and again, we don't have enough, there's more information we probably need. The kind of key feature between the Triumph 21, the Nova Blast 4, and the Adizero SL2 is they all have fairly narrow midfoot. I mean, the Nova Blast 4, it was a little bit wider, but the foam and the way the geometry is set up is I always felt like I got pitched into the midfoot, like the medial side very, very quickly, just because that they had that kind of rock, that, what would you call that? It was that they called it a trampoline kind of thing, but it like pitched you forward. And if you are like someone like myself, who's going medial anyway, like it just took me too far. So all those don't have super great midfoot stiffening agents either. Like the Triumph 21 was very narrow. It was a great shoe. It was definitely a weird Triumph because it was a faster shoe and a lighter Triumph. And now the current one fits kind of more consistently with where I would expect a premium neutral trainer to be, with the Power and PB and being softer. It differentiates from the ride. And the Adizero SL2 is great. It's just, there's not a stiffening agent. It's more narrow in the midfoot. So it's sounding like, And I almost was like, oh, you need a wider midfoot. But then you said the Boston 12. And I said, that shoe has a narrow midfoot. The way the geometry is set up is that the rods actually go out lateral. So it pitches you medial. And I went, oh, maybe it's not necessarily the medial motion. Maybe it's you just need a stiffening agent. Maybe you're someone that does a little bit better with a stiffer shoe, because the three shoes you mentioned at this time. Yeah, very good. The three shoes you mentioned are all have some form of stiffening agent, especially in the midfoot and throughout the entire length of the shoe. So you may do better with a shoe that's either stiffer or has a stiffening agent. And I give this caveat because like something like the Super Blast from Asics doesn't have a stiffening agent, but it is one of the stiffest shoes I've ever run.
Right.
So, it may be good that you have a shoe that has a little bit of that rocker, a little bit more of a stiffening agent. And I think if you have stuff that's working for you, awesome. Probably finding something that's similar to those ones is going to be great. And the great thing now, great for you, great, not as great for other people that want flexibility, is that a lot of trainers now have stiffening agents and are more rockered or moving in this direction. So I think the ones you're using, I think for longer runs may not be the Triumph 21 obviously is a big one, but the other two may not be the best option for longer runs. And if you're going to do longer efforts, you just need to have a stiffer shoe with a little bit better forefoot rocker at least. And that's something that just works for your mechanics maybe. Did I miss anything? Any thoughts?
No, I went in the very similar pathway. I think there were clear similarities and differences between the models that worked well and that didn't. Mainly that there was a stiffening agent versus non-stiffening agent. And I agree. It's you combine that stiffening agent with the more narrow platform. Maybe the rods in the Boston 12 do enough to stabilize for them medial lateral as well. So no, I don't have much more to add because I think you covered kind of what I was thinking about too. But for those who don't know what some of these terms are, abductor hallucis is a muscle that originates and ends in the foot. So they call it an intrinsic foot muscle, and it spans the inner arch of the foot. And so when you are going through walking or running cycles and your foot is moving through pronation and supination as it should, that muscle is part of that control of the arch. So if somebody's having issues with that, that could lead to arch pain, and you'd want to think about how much demand is put on there. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll kick it back to you, Matt, is that I have had random shoes. I'm thinking back to, what were those Mizuno models that had the very limited release? Wind. The wind.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wind. Yeah.
So there was something about the compliance and resilience of those shoes that every time I ran in them, I would get sharp arch pain. And not because it was a bad shoe. It just, there was something about the compliance of that shoe where in the first couple minutes, I would get this sharp pain. I'd actually have to hold my intrinsic, I'd have to do a short foot exercise the entire rest of the run so that I wouldn't have that sharp arch pain. So I'm wondering if there was just some matching between the foam of the Triumph 21, which has some similar properties to that shoe that I was talking about, the Neo, not Neo stuff, but the Wind. Maybe it was a Neo Wind. I can't remember. Sorry.
It was Neo. I believe it was Neo Wind. Yeah.
They don't make this shoe anymore, but it's, I think that there's something that sometimes our mechanics, plus even there was some studies done in the past about the vibration of different foams and how that interacts with the vibration frequency of your tendons. Like, I wonder for some of us, if there's just the right and wrong amount of vibration frequency that leads to some of that irritation. That is very unfounded in terms of what I was just saying, but just things that I've mused around in my head with.
Also super hard to measure.
Totally.
It's like, this is the fun part about research. He's like, oh, would it be cool this? And like, I don't even know how to measure that. And so maybe somebody does, but do you have the equipment for it? That's another question.
Yep. And then were you going to say something else?
I totally forgot.
Great. Well, let's move forward.
Let's keep going.
Our next question is from Tommy. They're asking about ultras, and they're basically asking, do you have thoughts? Oh, you remember it? All right, bring it back.
It's actually thinking about this question.
Oh, yeah. So I can read the question still?
Yeah.
Okay. Tommy's asking, Do you have any thoughts on best shoes to consider for road ultra marathons? They've got a 50-mile and 100-mile road ultra on their calendar in 2025. Currently running most of their miles in the Asics Superblast 2, but wondering if there are others they should consider and why. So, do you have any that pop into your mind? Before I read Superblast, I was like, honestly, Superblast would be great. But let's hear what you have to say.
So let me give a story. So for those who don't know, my wife did pro road ultra marathons for a few years, and that culminated in a second place finish at the US 50K Championships, a third place finish at the third place finish at the US 100K Championships, which Nathan was also there, and we had a great time.
Got to hang out.
Awesome. Yes. One of the key things that Regina and actually I experienced, because part of the thing of being married to this person is I did all of her training with her, which meant 30-mile long runs, which I cried during. I thought I liked running until we did that run. I'm like, I don't know if I like this anymore. But one of the things that I learned and then she taught me is the fastest shoe is not necessarily going to be the best one for ultra marathons. When Regina was doing the 100K, she actually switched out. She was wearing a super shoe and then partway through the race switched back to a highly cushioned daily trainer because she's like, I can't do this anymore. And that's what she ended up finishing far more comfortably in. I know there's a lot of people out there that love Alpha Flies, like stuff like that. But honestly, I would find a comfortable trainer that can handle long runs super well and go with that. So the Super Blast is really great. I found during that time that I could not handle super shoes for that long, no matter how stable neutral it was. I really needed for me personally, a well-cushioned, not too mushy, definitely solidly stable neutral shoe. The Super Blast is a great option for that. And I honestly think it's probably one of the best options for road ultras, just because it's really durable. I wish there was a little bit more room, so I would consider a half size up. But it's stiffer, but not like plate stiff. It's got good resilient cushioning that doesn't bottom out on you, and it's got a fit that stays really secure. I wish there was a little bit more room, and the durability is great. So that's kind of one of those ones that I would think about. I would think about those shoes that fit in that category. Those that maybe experience a little more foot swelling can handle a softer ride. The Neo Vista from Mizuno might be a comparable one to think about, but I think shoes in that category are probably going to be best. That I like those ones that you would consider to be super shoe alternatives. That the majority of the population would do better, and we talk about this all the time. Going, I know you want to run an X shoe, but this one that appears to be like more of this kind of faster training model, I think is where I would be looking. But the key is like the shoe that you're doing the majority of your miles in that you're comfortable with, that's probably the one you should use for the ultra.
Yeah. So I have a confession. Are you ready for my confession?
Yeah.
I was looking behind me and started thinking, and then I wasn't listening to your answer.
That's okay.
So you said one other specific shoe, correct? What shoe did you say?
Do you want to guess?
Well, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask you what you thought about a certain one. And maybe this is it. I was going to ask you because we talked about it in our last podcast, the Saucony Endorphin Trainer.
Oh, I did mention it, but I was thinking about it.
Okay. Which one did you mention?
The Neo Vista.
Oh, okay. No, I did hear that. Okay, great. Yeah. So Neo Vista. I just was curious what you would think about the Endorphin Trainer and where that would fit.
I think that would be a possible good option because it's not the most aggressive thing. It's a little more stiff. It does have more room than the Super Blast 2, so that might be really, really good. But again, it's Endorphin Trainer. So that shoe has been one of my favorite long range shoes recently. So yes, I think for the right person, that could also be another option. Cool. That's that like super shoe alternative, I think is where like even like super trainer is probably the better word. Although I know people were upset that the Endorphin Trainer didn't technically hit that super trainer category, but those types of shoes, yes. So I think if it fits your mechanics, that could be another great one.
Nice. What I didn't want to have happen is me to say, so what do you think? Do you think the Endorphin Trainer will work? You'd be like, dude, that's literally what I just said. So that's why I was like, wait, what did you say?
I think you admitted you didn't hear, and I think the listeners would have been last, but it would have been fine.
Yeah. The other shoe that came into my mind was the New Balance SC Trainer, the newest one. Mm-hmm. I think that for me, it's lightweight, so it's not going to feel like it bogs you down. It's got a very smooth transitioning rocker. It doesn't feel too aggressive. And from a comparison to something like the Super Blast that's working, I think that for them, I think it kind of fits in that category. It just has a little bit more compliance to it, but not like an extreme mushiness that some of the previous models did. I think that it's a bit more balanced when it comes to longer runs. So that's the other one I was going to throw out there, where if you've got time to try stuff out, that might be one to check out too.
That's another one. And by the way, what we haven't really I mentioned a little bit, but fit road ultra marathons, you are probably going to want to go a half, if not a full size up, to accommodate foot swelling. The SC trainer, for sure, go at least half the size up. I cannot imagine doing a road ultra in that shoe going true to size.
Well, it's funny you say that because I'm like, what do you mean this shoe fit great for me and it had a lot of room? That's because I actually got it a half size up anyway. So I have it half size up and I love the amount of volume that I have in it. And that's probably why it was working for me.
So you got to think about foot volume is another thing. Yeah. It's not necessarily shoe, but like you're probably going to want to go up because your feet will swell in ways that you have never experienced before.
Yeah, unless they've done these before, they kind of know. But if they know that like the Super Blast 2 fit is good for them, then I would say half size up in the SC trainer would also work because that has, for me, more room than Super Blast in true to size. Okay, our next question is from, our media manager, Bach Pham, just going to name drop him here because we have to, because we love him and he hates when we do. He puts these mailbags together based on all the emails that we get. So he curates them and he picks them out for us. And this one, I have a sneaking suspicion that it is from his truly, Bach Pham. Sorry, Bach, but what it says is, an anonymous person you definitely don't know asks... And then he writes this, and if it is Bach, it cracks me up. Hello, big fan of the pod. Shout out to my guy, David, who's not here today. Sorry, David. I have a brief question. How do you feel about flexibility in stability shoes? And do you think it's good? Do you think that it is good design to feature or a feature to have that flexibility in them? Also, why do flexible forefoot shoes hate me? Thanks. P.S. Go Pacers. That was the giveaway. The two things that gave it away was him saying, my guy, David. The second is P.S. Go Pacers. He's a big Indiana Pacers fan, which is a tough life to live. But Halliburton is overrated, and I didn't like him last year for reasons that will go untalked about because this is not a basketball podcast. But Matt, what do you got for this question about flexibility in stability shoes? And if this is Bach, he's somebody who does have a flatter foot. He doesn't have kind of a maintained arch. Why do you think flexible shoes hate him?
So let's start at the last part and then work our way back. So we know that different levels of flexibility or stiffness work better or worse for certain people. There is an optimal level depending on pace, which can change for each individual. And it'll vary depending on the mechanics of your foot, how much mobility you have, how much your foot and ankle can, or even up higher, can tolerate going through certain ranges of motion. So some people may love a flexible shoe because their joint proprioceptors, meaning the nerves and stuff in their feet and toes, actually like that. Or the way the mechanics work is they need to be able to get that motion to adequately achieve forward movement, right? Which is the whole point of running or gait or walking, is getting forwards usually. So to achieve that, different people need different things. And so some people like more flexibility. Some people maybe don't. Maybe they don't have adequate motion at the forefoot. Maybe they don't like various tissues going into more stretch, because the more you go, and a more flexible forefoot is probably going to get you into greater degrees of toe extension, meaning your toes are having to come up. That creates more stretch on different tissues. And maybe some people like that. Maybe some people don't. So it's not that you need to have this, or I don't know if it's necessarily a good or bad design feature. It's more about like what works for you as an individual. So that might be something that you have to figure out going, more flexible forefoot shoes may not work for me. And maybe some combination, like maybe you can tolerate some flexibility, but you still have to have an adequate forefoot rocker to get you that forward transition. So I don't know that, but yeah, so that's something unique to you that it just might not be working. You need something that's stiffer or more rockered or what have you. As to whether flexibility and stability shoes is that a good design feature or not, it has to be balanced out with the purpose of the shoe. So stability shoes are typically more stiff. They do that because stiffer shoes tend to be more stable. Now, there is a point where it actually starts to go the opposite way, where when it's too stiff, it limits motion. And so you have to think about the shoe as a whole. You can't go in individual pieces. So if you have an area where you've increased flexibility, you have to make sure that's getting you in the right direction, and that it's balanced with the stiffening agent, so it's not creating something that's working against you. Like a great example of this is not as common anymore, but back when I was working in running shoes, when the dinosaurs were still on the earth and we were still riding them to the store. I'm just kidding.
Matt,
great. I got a little. I know. I'm just trying to see if I can make Nathan laugh a little bit, but I had this deadpan look. I'm like, oh man, it's not gonna land.
No, you got me.
All right. So yeah, no, it wasn't that long ago, but not too long ago, there was a lot of stability shoes where the midfoot was super narrow and they'd still have a post in there. And if you have a narrower sole, it inherently makes the shoe more flexible. I mean, if you add a stiffening agent, yeah, it goes against that. But narrower shape, there's less material, it tends to flex more. Wider, there's more material, there tends to be more bending stiffness in a variety of directions. So it never made sense to me why you're trying to make something stable and you made it super narrow and just threw a post in there. Those shoes would still feel unstable to me. Or like a stability shoe where they've made it too soft and you might have a stability feature in there, but the softness just makes it feel more unstable. It's how you balance all these things. So that was a very long way of saying, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to have flexibility in a stability shoe. It just needs to be balanced so it still accomplishes what category it's in. And so that might work really well for someone. It might not work for others. So it will vary on the individual.
Awesome. All right. We have one final question for the day. This is from Chris asking about hallux limitus. So hallux limitus is the inability of your big toe to extend upward, which we need a very good amount of that as we run, particularly if you have a flexible forefoot. Speaking of flexible forefoots, they're basically looking for a shoe that checks a bunch of boxes for them. They want a shoe that has an early stage rocker, low amount of toe spring, and a wide and higher volume toe box, because they've loved topo fits. They're finding the Phantom 3 kind of cuts a little bit onto their fifth digit. Ultra Escalante 4 squishes the foot a little bit more. They're just looking for something that checks these boxes: early rocker, low toe spring, high volume toe box. I have a couple. Yeah, I have a couple that I was thinking about. One of them, and you're going to have to tell me from a construction of the toe box perspective on what you think about this. But when I was reading his question, the fact that even the Phantom is going on to the fifth digit, I wonder if, Chris could just hear me say this and say, this is not a problem. But it makes me wonder if a half size up would be helpful to add some length to where that taper is starting on the toe box. Because if it's too short, the first thing that's going to get hit in pretty much any shoe is going to be that fifth digit. So if you have a little bit extra room to spare, I would maybe go half size up. But then to your point about an earlier stage rocker, I think that you're going to have to make sure, again, if you're going half size up, that moves that apex further towards your toes. So it does need to be an earlier stage. The shoe that came into my mind was the Glide Ride Max from Asics. I think that shoe, in comparison to their other models, does have a higher volume toe box compared to others. I think that is a solid functioning rocker. There is a slight toe spring, but nothing like the early models of it. So I don't necessarily think it would be a problem. The only thing is that newest model is slightly more flexible than the previous. That's my hesitation there. But if the Phantom 3 rocker was working for you, then I'm not sure if you'd have problems with the rocker of the Glide Ride Max, because it is stiffer and a little bit earlier stage. So that was the first one. And then actually going back from a fit standpoint, going back to Karhu, there's going now, and then looking at the Mistari run, we were just talking about the rockered one. Maybe they're high-vo, plus that shoe could be something worth trying out as well. Those are the two that popped into my head when I was reading this question. Do you have others?
I think off the top of my head, the Mastari Run was another one, the high volume version that I loved because of that wider fit. Like I felt like it felt as wide, if not even a little bit wider than Ultra and Topo. The rocker also, there is excellent.
Ultra Fit is very low volume right now.
Yeah.
Like that, their most recent models have been they've been that way, which again isn't bad or good. But if this person's looking for that, it doesn't surprise me that the Escalante felt tight because it felt narrow to me.
Mm-hmm. I felt the same way. A lot of Ultra stuff, some of their trail stuff, or they're like really highly cushioned models can fit a little bit wider. But you're totally right that I feel like they're a narrow anatomic shoe and low volume shoe frequently. That's where Topo can frequently be helpful as an alternative to creating shoes that are a little bit more truly, wide. Yeah, I was trying to think of another one.
I have one more, and it's the On Cloud Monster Hyper. I think that fit is I think that is a wider fitting shoe in general. It's got a solid, stiffer rocker, very flat in terms of construction on top. So I would throw that in the mix if you have that's an expensive shoe. So that I would have to work from a financial perspective, but that's another one to try out.
Definitely a higher volume for sure. I struggled with lockdown on that shoe for a while, but that might benefit Chris. So who knows? Yeah, I think those are really good options.
Cool. Do you have any others to add or feel good about that?
I think the shoes that are being described are kind of like not quite in this area because the Escalante 4 is a pretty low, like relatively lower stack height shoe. I know it's not low stack height, more moderate. Somebody can roast me in the comments for that. The Phantom is also not the highest stack height shoe. You really want a rockered shoe, you're gonna have to go higher stack height. And I think Topo and Ultra are probably some of the few that don't add too much toe spring when you start going up that high. A lot of other companies do. So I'm totally blanking on a couple models right now, but what's a really popular one from Topo? Like the high cushioned.
Not the Spectre, but a different one.
Yeah, not the super foamed ones. The
one that David tested.
Yeah, the one
only David tested it. Oh,
Andrew, I think tested it too. You know what I'm talking about?
You keep talking. Fill the air. I'm gonna look it up.
Trying to fill it. Man, another one from why am I struggling with
Atmos?
shoes?
Is it Atmos?
Yes, the Topo Atmos. Yeah. Might be one to consider because it's higher stack height, so therefore they're gonna be forced to have a 4-foot rocker.
But more of a rocker.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was an earlier one or it was a little later and aggressive, but given that it was a training model, I'm assuming that it was kind of a longer one because you have to if it's going to be for training.
How about the Glycerin Max from a fit standpoint? I rule out a lot of shoes for this question because the fits have not been good. Like,
that's okay. But, caveat. So I like the Glycerin Max. I think I needed a half size up. However, that was not the earliest 4-foot rocker. 4-foot's pretty stiff. It's late. Yeah. So if you can give that shoe some time to break in, maybe. However, like the concerns about the toe box stuff, you definitely need a half size up in that shoe. Okay. Like I bruised my toe pretty bad running 100 miles in that shoe. I'm glad I did, but I should have listened to you and asked for a half size up earlier. Yeah. So maybe I'm more hesitant with that one.
Okay, cool. Well, this was a fun mailbag. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to kind of what we're doing here, because it's fun to be able to interact with the things that y'all actually want to hear us talk about. So thank you for sending your questions. You can continue to send other ones to doctorsofrunning@gmail.com. We always want to thank Scratch for giving us the fuel to power this podcast. They've been a really fun partner. And yeah.
Dude, the oat milk latte from them is
actually really good.
Solid. I was very hesitant as someone who's been a milk, like a cow and soy milk, mostly cow milk for my entire life. And I'm like, oat milk? Like, what? What's it? It's actually, the bag's gone and I'm going to order some more.
Well, what's nice about it too, from a taste standpoint is, so as a kid, and still, I have an extreme sweet tooth. Like I love sweet tooth stuff. So whenever we would get a special like coffee drink, I get like the sweetest coffee drink ever as a kid, especially. And as a kid, I mean like in college, which again, we're not that old, but but I didn't drink any sort of coffee or coffee drinks growing up. It just wasn't part of our family culture. Anyway, not important. But what I like about the oat milk latte is that it feels like the Frappuccino that I would always get from them. Like, the ones in the bottle that are like sealed up and you just get them at the gas station, but it's way less sweet. So it just like, it actually has like good flavor to it. And just, it just feels better going down, sits in the stomach way better than those Frappuccinos, obviously. Pretend that would be problematic.
Good, like good contents in them. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree. The oat milk latte is delicious. So
shout out. Yeah.
Really good. So with that, let's end it for today. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you all next time.